Ladies and gentlemen, Alapa, Alapa, welcome to each and every one of you to Harry's Deepenings. We have been studying together, as I mentioned, for a while. We have some new friends with us. I see from France, from the United States, and other places, I'm sure. Welcome to yourselves. Thank you very much for joining us and the original crew, the original cast that has been studying with us for some maybe 4 years now. So we are going to be embarking on a journey going into some answered questions, a book that I'm very excited to go into. Just to clarify from the offset so that nobody's disappointed, my qualifications when it comes to studying such texts is that I am a DJ. That's where it starts, that's where it stops. So hopefully, with the wealth of knowledge that we have here amongst all of us, we'll be able to chip in to explain things and share our understandings of things. I don't have any specific understanding that trumps anybody's in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not trying to be humble there, that's genuinely the truth. But we have some very intelligent minds and some thoughts that will come across, I'm sure. So we will go through each paragraph, reading things, and then we can reflect on them and see what they mean to us and our understandings. And again, there may well be more than one understanding, and that's always a beautiful thing about studying together. But as far as some answered questions go, I thought it would be worth giving a little introduction. Many of you will be familiar with this incredible text, but it's worth saying a word or two about it with your permission. So, Some Answered Questions is a compilation of table talks that were given by Abdu'l-Baha and were collected by Laura Clifford Barney in Akka between 1904 and 1906 across several pilgrimages. Now, the book was first published in English in 1908. For those who may not be so familiar with the Baha'i Faith, Abdu'l-Baha was the son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, and was appointed by him as his successor and interpreter of his words. Now, Abdu'l-Baha's answers were first written down in Persian by his secretary and afterwards revised twice by Abdu'l-Baha himself. In 1908, 3 first editions were published, and we fast forward to 2014, where the works was extensively retranslated and published. So that is the version that we are going to be using, the retranslated version, which is more accurate, one could say. So, who was the lady, Laura Clifford Barney, behind this? Well, she was born in 1878 to a family of industrialists and artists in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her father was Albert Barney, who was a wealthy industrialist. Her mother, Alice Pike Barney, was an artist, a philanthropist, and a prominent civic and social leader. She also had one sister, and this is Laura Clifford Barney and her sister, a beautiful picture of them, taken by myself many years ago. And they were accustomed to having a lot of wealth. They would have private tutors for the early years of their education. So it's very interesting how when eventually she becomes a Baha'i and she goes and learns about the faith, when she spends her time in Akka in some very different conditions. She had met none other than Ruhi Khanum's mother, May Bowles, as she was known, later on May Maxwell, who was a Canadian Baha'i and the mother-in-law of Shoghi Effendi. And that's when she converted to the faith in roughly around the year 1900. Her mother, that we had seen a picture of, she soon converted afterwards. Now, in 1911, she met her husband, Hippolyte Dreyfus, when married, he was known as Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney. Now, both Laura and Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney played a vital role in Abdu'l-Baha's successful visits to the West. And I do apologize, I know there's a Frenchman here, Clifford, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing Hippolyte's name right. I may be getting it slightly wrong. But as far as they had the successful visits to the West that Abdu'l-Baha came in, and they were very involved in that, their intimate and personal relationships with Abdu'l-Baha is unquestioned. And even though Hippolyte accompanied Abdu'l-Baha more so than Laura and translated many of his speeches to French, Nonetheless, Laura's role is unique in the special bond she developed through her travels to Acre during her youth, and later on in Paris was able to host Abdu'l-Baha. Her proficiency in speaking Farsi is another aspect that was unique at the time for non-Persian women. Abdu'l-Baha's first visit to Paris took place in September of 1911 and was hosted by Laura and Hippolyte, the husband. They also travelled to London and acted as his interpreters. They were his confidants, one could say. Abdu'l-Baha's next visit to the West and the US was to take place in 1912. Laura was present again in New York. Also New Jersey, Washington, and DC. So she was really spending a lot of time intimately with the master. Upon his return to London, both Laura and Hippolyte were present again, and their last visit to Acre to visit Abdu'l-Baha took place in 1921, and I'm sure you'll all recognize that that's the same year that the master had passed away. So Hippolyte Dreyfus-Barney himself was active in the International Council of Women from the 1920s through to the 1960s, and was its representative to the League of Nations, and then later worked in the United Nations Children's Fund with the various non-governmental organizations after World War II. Now, to really give you an in-depth story of her life would take an incredibly long time. Unfortunately, we wouldn't have time to go through all of that. But you can buy a book about her, written by Mona Khademi, entitled The Life of Laura Barney. So that was just a brief overview of who she was and this meeting with Abdu'l-Baha where she'd asked these table talks. And I must say that Abdu'l-Baha was very tired every time he would speak, as they would eat together, and he'd say words to the effect of, "I've given you my tiredest moments." So Abdu'l-Baha would give these answers to the questions that were put forward. Now, alas, Laura had passed away on the 19th of August, 1874 in Paris. Here you can see her resting place. So we will focus now on some answered questions as we work our way through this. And again, as I've mentioned, I have no special knowledge of this book. Together, we will get to read and study and go deeper into it. So you'll see here also in this picture that it's not just Laura Clifford Barney who is laid to rest in Paris, also her husband as well. So we will get on to the actual book, but before we do, I thought it's worth having an overview of what some of the details in the book are. And the book is divided into 5 different parts, and we're going to look at those parts, a very slight overview. And I'd like to perhaps call on Sandra, if Sandra's with us and able to read, to just read this, which shows us what part 1 of this book is. So, dear Sandra, are you in a position to be able to read for us, please?
1. The influence of the prophets in the evolution of humanity. Part 1 covers topics such as the one universal law that governs nature, rational and spiritual proofs of the existence of God, manifestations of God, in brackets Abraham, Moses, Christ, Muhammad, in brackets includes his wife and battles, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah, in brackets, and biblical prophecies from chapters 8, 9, and 12 of the book of Daniel, chapter 11 of the book of Isaiah, and chapters 11 and 12 of the book of Revelation. 2. Some Christian subjects. Part 2 consists of subjects of Christian interest, such as the significance of symbolism, intelligible realities and their expression through sensible forms, an examination and breakdown of various verses from the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve, the birth of Christ, the greatness of Christ, baptism, miracles, the Eucharist, Peter and the papacy, the resurrection of Christ, the Holy Spirit, the second coming of Christ, the day of judgment, the Trinity, sin, blasphemy, and predestination.
Number 3, the powers and conditions of the manifestations of God. Part 3 speaks about topics such as the 5 aspects of spirit, the stations, power, and influence of the manifestations of God, universal cycles, the 2 classes of prophets, God's rebukes to the prophets, and infallibility.
Number 4, the origin, powers, and conditions of men. The 4th part includes a commentary on the theory of evolution, the origin of the universe, the difference between man and animal, the origin of man, the difference between the soul, mind, and spirit, human nature, the origin of the spirit and mind of men, the relationship between the spirit and the body, the relationship between God and man, emanationism, the physical and intellectual powers of men, the differences of character in men, the degree of knowledge man possesses, and the knowledge the manifestations of God possess. Man's knowledge of God, the immortality of the spirit, the state and progress of the spirit after death, faith, the influence of the stars, free will, visions, dreams and communication with spirits, and spiritual and physical healing.
Miscellaneous subjects. Part 5 goes into topics such as the non-existence of evil, 2 kinds of torment, the justice and mercy of God, the punishment of criminals, strikes, reality, pre-existence, reincarnation, pantheism, unity of existence, 4 kinds of comprehension, and ethics.
Superb. Thank you so much indeed. So that gives us a little overview of some of the topics that we get to study, some of the gems that we get to polish out and really understand. And it's such a gift, it really is, that Laura Clifford Barney was able to spend that time with the master, but also have this put together in a form where we can study and see some of the answers of Abdu'l-Baha. Remember, these were Abdu'l-Baha's tired moments, and he's giving one could say, a layman's term explanation as to some of these subjects, and was very much joyed to know that Laura Clifford Barney was able to comprehend a lot of what was being shared. And we see many things about these subjects. At the time, there were different philosophers and all sorts of things, and Abdu'l-Baha refers to some of these as we go through them. So what we will do is we will read together, as mentioned, and we'll go through these. And if anybody has anything they wish to say after each one, please feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions or any comments, any viewpoints you may have and wish to share with us. So we will read these, and I'll ask dear Sandra if she'd be kind enough, please, to kick us off with the reading as we go on to read the first of the topics that are covered here. So remember, the chapter of this, as such, would be the influence of the the prophets in the evolution of humanity. So that's the main, the bigger of these 5 things. That's what we're going to be looking at just now.
Chapter 1. Nature is governed by a universal law. 1. Nature is that condition or reality which outwardly is the source of the life and death, or in other words, of the composition and decomposition of all things. 2. This nature is subject to a sound organization, to inviolable laws, to a perfect order, and to a consummate design, from which it never departs. To such an extent is this true, that were you to gaze with the eye of insight and discernment, you would observe that all things, from the smallest invisible atom to the largest globes in the world of existence, such as the sun or the other great stars and luminous bodies, are most perfectly organized, be it with regard to their order, their composition, their outward form, or their motion, and that all are subject to one universal law from which they never depart. Question, Dave, do you want me to say the paragraph numbers?
No, that's not necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. When you consider nature itself, however, you see that it has neither awareness nor will. For instance, the nature of fire is to burn. It burns without consciousness or will. The nature of water is to flow. It flows without consciousness or will. The nature of the sun is to shed light. It shines without consciousness or will. The nature of vapor is to rise. It rises without consciousness or will. It is therefore evident that the natural movements of all created things are compelled, and that nothing moves of its own will save animals, and in particular, man. Man is able to resist and oppose nature inasmuch as he discovers the natures of things, and by virtue of this discovery, has mastery over nature itself. Indeed, all the crafts that man has devised proceed from this discovery. For example, he has invented the telegraph, which connects the East and the West. It is therefore evident that man rules over nature. Now, can such organization, order, and laws as you observe in existence be attributed merely to the effect of nature, notwithstanding that nature itself has neither consciousness nor understanding? It is therefore evident that this nature, which has neither consciousness nor understanding, is in the grasp of the omnipotent Lord, who is the ruler of the world of nature, and who causes it to manifest whatsoever he desires. Some say that human existence is among those things that have appeared in the world of being and that are due to the exigencies of nature. Were this true, man would be the branch and nature the root. But is it possible that there could exist a will, a consciousness, and certain perfections in the branch, which are absent in the root? Hence, it is clear that nature, in its very essence, is in the grasp of God's might, and that it is that eternal and almighty one who subjects nature to ideal laws and organizing principles, and who rules over it.
Thank you very much, dear Sandra. Thank you. So we will go over this particular this chapter 1. So the argument being put forth is that nature is governed by one universal law, and Abdu'l-Baha is making this case quite strongly, saying that we can see it's clear and evident that there are determined laws in nature, that there is order and a final design that it will never depart from, and that this order can be viewed, we can see it if we were to look at atoms, the way atoms move and the way the sun is, and other great stars and luminous spheres that come around, and they all exist under one law. And so we can see from their arrangement, their composition, their form, their movement, so it's clear. Then he goes on to make another point, saying that nature doesn't have any will or intelligence of its own, and it just acts innately as it does. So if we look at fire, for example, fire never becomes a waterfall. Fire doesn't pick up a guitar and start singing. Fire burns. Water flows. It has fluidity. It's under it, if it's left to itself, can't depart from it. Of course, you can do things to it, so you could freeze it to make it solid, but that again is nature controlling it as well, the laws of nature. Or water vapor, if you boil a cup of tea, the Persians love their tea, you will see, of course, it vaporizes and it comes up. The other thing is that the natural movements of all things are therefore compelled. There are no voluntary movements in nature, so that take place really, apart from when it comes to animals and humans, that we move around. You don't see trees getting up and walking and saying, right, I'm going across to California, the weather is better than it is in London, which is a true point, but that doesn't happen. Whereas with humans, we do that. We do move around. And then Abdu'l-Baha goes on to explain that nature could not have created itself, that with such organization, arrangements, and laws, it's not possible, as it doesn't have the intelligence or even the perception to do so. And therefore, nature is in the grasp of God, that whatever God wishes, well, he causes nature to manifest. So this again is making the point, Abdu'l-Baha is making the point that clearly there must be something more perfect, that's a creator, so we'll refer to this creator as God, that comes in. And we can see that man is able, that humans are able to overcome nature. We're able to do things. For example, if we want to fly in the air, we don't have wings, but we create airplanes, we create telephones, we are able to manipulate the laws of nature through sciences. And again, this is where humans are able to do this. But again, what then has caused humans to allow this to happen? And then paragraph 6, as I understand it, says that some say that human existence is as a result of nature, that this has come about because nature has run its course and therefore there was a need for human existence. But Abdu'l-Baha is saying, actually, well, no, that's not necessarily the case, because if that was true in this analogy, we would be man would be the branch and nature would be the root. But there are things in the branch that are absent from the root. There are things that we have that nature doesn't have. We've excelled in a sense. So he's saying this in its very essence, that nature is controlled by God and has these laws that govern it. This is my understanding of this. Does anybody have any comments or any questions they have with regards to this first chapter? Dear Sandra, your hand is raised. If you could unmute for us, Sandra.
Sorry. Just with regard to what you've just said, so Abdul Baha is saying that evolution didn't occur, or that we were outside of the evolutionary process, or that there was still a will, the God's will, that brought about the evolution. Could you explain a bit more?
Great question, Sandra. Great. So actually, evolution comes up in this book, and we'll go deeper into evolution. And I think it's undoubted that evolution, Darwinism, does exist. We do see that things evolve to a degree, but to sort of jump forward many chapters, the understanding is that humans aren't a continuation of evolution in terms of the amoeba coming through and then everything growing, the fish, gaining legs and everything, that we were created uniquely to come forth. So we weren't part of that journey as such. So we do believe in evolution. It's not that evolution doesn't exist, but the journey of man. And again, as I say, this comes up in the chapters later on. So we'll go into that. But I think the primary point that's being made here that Abdul Baha starts with is that nature is governed by one law. So really, what is this law? What law has brought this about? And that law arguably would be the law of God. But as I say, we'll get into evolution properly later on. Mrs. Yai.
Yes, when you say that the nature is in the grasp of God, then all these earthquakes and floods, are they the will of God, or they are the result of certain conditions which produce them?
Excellent question. Again, excellent question. As I understand it, Abdul Baha says there are three things that we will never understand. My wife would say there's four things, and I am one of those four things. But there are three things that we'll never understand, and that is the true nature of the soul, the afterlife, and then finally where God's will takes over our free will. Where does our free will start and stop, and where God's will takes over? So really, I think it's such a brilliant question, Mrs. Ci, but who knows what the answer of that is? I think it's clear and evident if we are to look at what humans are doing to the world. Well, it could be argued, sorry, because there are some people who don't believe in this, that there are effects on the world. So what you'd have to, I think for yourself, did these earthquakes happen because of what humans have done? Is, if you believe in climate change, as I'm sure the majority of people do, but some people won't, then is that as a result of what humans have done? I think these are all things that one would need to look at. But a great question, Mrs. Again, where that free will stops and where God's nature takes over, we don't know, really. Dear Aniela. Aniela, your hand was raised.
I didn't unmute and I was just talking away, and it was so eloquent and I had no idea what I'm saying now. And I do think we humans need to come to terms with the consequences of our ignorance and unethical behavior with Mother Earth. And so, this generation may not feel it. The next generation may feel even worse what we have done. So there's that. Set that aside. And then look at the phenomena of the sandstorm after the martyrdom of the Bab. So there's the phenomenal, and then there's consequences.
Thank you very much, dear Aniela. Thank you so much. Sandra, your hand is up. Is this an old hand or a new hand? Again, as we ask our questions, if we can lower our hands, it helps knowing who wants to speak next. So unless there's anybody else who wishes to comment on this particular chapter, then we will move forward on to the next one. But yes, again, I would certainly argue, and I would agree with you, Aniela, that some responsibility must be taken to what we do to the planet, and we can see the effects of our actions quite often. But in that case that Aniela said, yes, after the the martyrdom of the Barb and Tabriz, there was this storm that suddenly appeared, and we see many things happen by our studies of the Dawnbreakers nonetheless. So we will continue on then to the next chapter, proofs and arguments for the existence of God. And Sandra, could I trouble you again, please, to read for us?
Among the proofs and arguments for the existence of God is the fact that man has not created himself, but rather that his creator and fashioner is another than he. And it is certain and indisputable that the creator of man is not like man himself, because a powerless being cannot create another being, and an active creator must possess all perfections to produce his handiwork. Is it possible for the handiwork to be perfect and the craftsman imperfect? Is it possible for a painting to be a masterpiece and the painter, notwithstanding that he is its creator? No, the painting cannot be like the painter, for otherwise it would have painted itself. And no matter how perfect the painting may be, in comparison with the painter, it is utterly deficient. Thus, the contingent world is the source of deficiencies, and God is the source of perfection. The very deficiencies of the contingent world testify to God's perfections. For example, when you consider man, you observe that he is weak, and this very weakness of the creature betokens the power of one who is eternal and almighty. For were it not for power, weakness could not be imagined. Thus, the weakness of the creature is evidence of the power of God. Without power, there could be no weakness. This weakness makes it evident that there is a power in the world. Again, in the contingent world, there is poverty. Hence, there must be wealth for there to be poverty in the world. In the contingent world, there is ignorance. Hence, there must be knowledge for there to be ignorance. If there were no knowledge, neither could there be ignorance. For ignorance is the non-existence of knowledge. And if there were no existence, non-existence could not be. It is certain that the entire contingent world is subject to an order and a law which it can never disobey. Even man is forced to submit to death, sleep, and other conditions. That is, in certain matters, he is compelled, and this very compulsion implies the existence of one who is all-compelling. So long as the contingent world is characterized by dependency, and so long as this dependency is one of its essential requirements, there must be one who, in his own essence, is independent of all things. In the same way, the very existence of a sick person shows that there must be one who is healthy, for without the latter, the existence of the former could not be established. It is therefore evident that there is an eternal and almighty one who is the sum of all perfections, for otherwise he would be even as the creatures. Likewise, throughout the world of existence, the smallest created thing attests to the existence of a creator. For instance, this piece of bread attests that it has a maker. Gracious God, the change in the outward form of the smallest thing proves the existence of a creator. Then how could this vast, boundless universe have created itself and come to exist solely through the mutual interaction of the elements? How patently false is such a notion? These are theoretical arguments adduced for weak souls. But if the eye of inner vision be opened, 100,000 clear proofs will be seen. Thus, when man feels the indwelling spirit, he is in no need of arguments for its existence. But for those who are deprived of the grace of the Spirit, it is necessary to set forth external arguments.
Thank you, Sandra. So, proofs and evidences of the existence of God. And this is how Abdu'l-Baha goes through and describes it, saying that the imperfections of a creature prove the existence of a perfect creator. So the creator cannot be imperfect while the creation is perfect. So this is the way Abdu'l-Baha is explaining it, saying that everything and anything in existence actually proves that there is a creator, that nothing creates itself. We can look at 100,000 different things that exist in the world, whatever it is, anything that we look at. How did this come about? It's always what caused this to happen. Something can't create itself. So the smallest, the thing that changes is the proof of an existence of the creator. And the examples given of a painting, that a painting can't paint itself. It is the painter that is perfect in his art, or at least relative to the painting anyway, ends up managing to create this thing. And we see countless things. I think, if we were to take pieces of a watch and put them in a box and shake them for as long as we can, they're not going to suddenly come together and create something. It's utter nonsense to suggest that this watch would just bring about and create itself. So this is what Abdu'l-Baha is explaining, and then says that man's imperfections also demonstrate the existence of a separate perfect creator, that we didn't create ourselves, and we have this contingent world. So contingent, as I understand it, meaning dependent upon something. So when you look at man, you might think, well, this man is impatient. Well, that proves that there's patience. This man is weak, therefore strength must exist. We see that there's poverty in the world, which means there must be richness. So all of these things are there. And then Abdu'l-Baha explains that man is also being governed by certain forces. As great as we think we are, we cannot go without sleep, without food or water. These things can't come about. So if perfection didn't exist, again, there couldn't be imperfections. Again, you can't have dark. Dark doesn't exist by itself. You can't in your house go on and turn on a dark, but you can go on and turn on a light. That's just not possible to do. So it's that, again, that lack of that quality, which again, I'm sure many of us are very familiar with that argument. We've heard that before. So this is everything Abdu'l-Baha explains perfectly like this. And then this last bit, part 8 of it, which I love so dearly, where Abdu'l-Baha says, these are theoretical arguments adduced for weak souls. So here's the logic for those weak souls who need these arguments as to the existence of God. Well, here we are. This is it. However, if we are to have our inner vision open, so what does that mean? And I put that question to you all. What does that mean for our inner vision to be opened? Seeing with our soul, reflecting, meditating perhaps? Then we see 100,000 clear proofs. So we don't need this logic. And of course, we can use our rational minds and our hearts to understand things. And again, these subjects will come up later on in our study. But it's those who are deprived of the grace of the Spirit that need these particular arguments. So the first hand raised was by Terry. I believe it was Terry, then Jenna Bakuchikzadeh, then Aniela. So Terry, please, if you'd like to share with us your thoughts.
Hey, yeah, the comment I was going to make is, okay, there's this argument that some people, theoretical physicists, have argued, saying that God doesn't exist. They assume that if you put 100,000 monkeys in a room with 100,000 typewriters over 100,000 years, somebody's going to put together the works of Shakespeare or something. It's just, and it seems to me that Abdu'l-Baha is refuting that such argument. Also, another thing too, it seems like we exist in a universe of action and reaction. I guess Sir Isaac Newton talked about, action and reaction. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Like if, for, propulsion, you have a rocket motor, you throw force one direction and then motion goes in the opposite direction and such. But basically that was just a comment I was getting ready to make.
Thank you, Terry. And you're quite right, and people do put forth those arguments. I think each of us can reflect if we truly believe, again, some scientists, as you say, if you get 100,000 monkeys in 100,000 years, if they'll be able to put the words Shakespeare with a typewriter, I think that's utter nonsense, personally. But again, maybe some people believe that these monkeys will be able to come up with the works of Shakespeare. Let's assume that they learn how to type, that they learn how to put the paper in and change the ink and all the rest of it. I think that's incredibly unlikely. But it's not about what I think. Some of these arguments, sure, they are put forth. And again, I think the stronger thing here is, as Abdu'l-Baha said, firstly, there's no proof for that. That's merely a, well, this might happen. Who knows? Let's try this. It might happen, but there's zero proof. And again, scientists love working with proof. And as Baha'is, we very much value scientists. We very much value science. But the majority of scientists don't actually believe that. And if someone comes up with something just because it's plausible, it doesn't mean it's true as well. It's like, okay, that's interesting. But again, what does Abdu'l-Baha do? He throws it back and says, forget those arguments anyway. Or they're just, I mean, if you really were to look logically, in Abdu'l-Baha's opinion, you would find that to be true. But the real existence of God is from within, by looking within. And that's how we could do that. Jenna Bakuchikzadeh, thank you for the point, Terry. Thank you very much.
Allah, friends, I hope that I don't sound presumptuous, but when you look at the human beings, millions and millions of them throughout the world, different races, different colors, different shapes, and different looks, you would find they all have the same anatomy. And if it was to be a accidental creation, that would never be the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jenna Bakuchikzadeh. Thank you. Dear Aniela.
Seems so simple when you say it like that, and when Abdu'l-Baha puts it into this kind of logic. Thank God, because I am one of those weak souls adducing incorrect arguments. theoretical arguments when I happened upon the Baha'i faith. Actually, I know nothing still, but there's something very interesting happening that, you know, Abdul Baha is building upon for me, that, you know, he keeps speaking about the weakened souls, the healthy souls, and this idea of the inner vision being opened. And for, you know, when we go back to the purpose or the three things that Baha'u'llah, the manifestation of God, requires of his creation: recognition, obedience, and humility. This is not the all humble God, right? So the act of the obligatory prayer, where we are actually saying, testifying before the heavens, before the Creator, of you know, that my powerlessness and thy might, my poverty and thy wealth continually nourishes that humility, so that 100,000 proofs can show itself to our inner selves, that we are ever in search or investigation of truth.
Thank you very much, dear Aniela. Thank you for sharing that. I also find it interesting that I'm certain Abdul Baha could come up with many more arguments, actually, for the proof and existence of God, but he arguably doesn't dwell upon this, because that is not how you really find God. And any argument, actually, you can have a counter argument, and you could say, well, is this really true? Even as simple as 1 + 1. You know, is 1 + 1 always 2? Someone could argue and say, well, you've got one receptacle of water and another receptacle of water. Put them together, do you end up with 2 receptacles? No, you still have 1 receptacle of water. There's a body of water here. You know, people can try and argue against various things, and I think that's where the true proof is, that deep inside, that spiritual side, and trying to prove and argue God logically. Even one could say, well, that's like trying to prove that love exists. It's like me saying to Paymon there in the USA, look, Paymon, love exists. Here is the formula. Take the formula and try and understand it. It's like, well, his understanding of love would be so much deeper were he to open his heart, were he to feel it, and it would be a lot more meaningful as well, rather than just rationally saying, yeah, this exists, there we are. Because it's, even if you accept God exists, arguably, what point is that? Unless you have that love there for him, that deeper understanding as to what he's trying to share with you, what he's moving us to do. So thank you. Thank you very much for those points. Any other points, ladies and gentlemen? Dear Sheila.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Hello to everyone. And yet, even today, the physicists of the world, theoretical, empirical, are still trying to prove what happened before the Big Bang. They want to know what happened before the Big Bang, and they're trying to prove it. And so the ridiculousness of it is just beyond conception to me. I'm astounded by how ridiculous that whole thing is.
Thank you, Sheila. I mean, we are humans. We're trying to find meaning. We're on our search, and many of us understand things just logically, and that's the way in which, especially in the world of academia, one can lean on logic too much, and we see it within the faith. Some of the most prominent Baha'is, who were incredible minds, sadly went down a path that led them to no good, unfortunately, and they didn't engage in both parts of them. And we are spirits in our essence. We are souls, and we are more than just the logic, whilst that logic is incredibly important as well. And I'm sure we'll speak a lot more about science as we go through this book, and we see that, you know, a very close friend of mine is a quantum physicist, and the more he's getting into that, the more he's really seeing that quantum physics actually leans more to saying there must be a God, and there's certain things that are utterly inexplainable, and such as the theory of entanglement with quantum entanglement, how when you take one atom, and it doesn't matter how far away they are, and you give this atom a certain spin, the other atom instantaneously spins as well. So it's what is causing this to happen. There are many examples of this, and again, I'm sure we'll probably have some scientists in this chat who would like to bring things forth as well. But the overriding point, as I say, with this that I find very interesting is Abdu'l-Baha is saying, yeah, if you want some, look, for the children, here we are, here's some proofs, but actually the real deep meaning is on this inner reflection. So, ladies and gentlemen, most of you know who are regulars here, our sessions last for an hour. So we have bites of an hour, and then we will come back to it in our next session. So these particular sessions will run on a Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. On Mondays, we are studying the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, so you are warmly welcome if you wish to join us for that. Of course, the last major works of His Holiness Baha'u'llah, written in 1891. So that's on the Mondays. The link and the time is always the same. And Sundays, we have a fireside as well with various different speakers who come, and they are announced. So if you wish to be added to the WhatsApp group, there is a WhatsApp group that sends you reminders and lets us know, then please leave your telephone number in the chat.
Valo yakfiyan Allah Rabbaka min shay La fi samawat Valo fil ars Valo ma bainahuma إنه كان على كافيا قديرا